Welcome. Today we will explore the window of tolerance, and this is part two of a two-part series. And today we will look at strategies. My name is Beck. I am a senior advisor with the Australian Childhood Foundation, and I invite you to get comfortable today and welcome you as we begin to explore in more depth strategies on working with the window of tolerance. I acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands and waters of the region that I am working from today, which is the Kaurna Nation. And I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and pay particular mindfulness to the concept that has been a strong cultural tradition for many thousands of years, and that is embodied connection. Let's hold that in the forefront of our minds as we move into today's learning. As you know, what we learn today and in all sessions is part of a partnership between the ACT Education Directorate and our organisation, the Australian Childhood Foundation. There are many different components to the program, so I do remind you and invite you to just keep posted and get involved. As we do for every webinar, we will briefly go through the key points underpinning our learning, because it is really important to keep these in mind and almost use them as an anchor point or a framework to practice from. So these pieces of information and concepts around how trauma can impact the neurobiology of the brain is really important, because not only in terms of theory do they outline the way that trauma impacts the developing child, but equally it allows for us to start to align our practice to these principles. And we know through our evidence that if we can align our practice to these principles, we have a much better chance to support the healing of the child after the impact of trauma that they've experienced. So firstly, we have the principle of neurosequential development. Now, as you probably remember, this simply means that our brain develops in particular order, and it's sequential. There's a phased structure to development. So the brain will begin to develop from the bottom and finish at the top. It will also move from back to front and from right to left, eventually integrating into a whole organ of systems that support our relational and other functions in the world. If we have a disruption at any point during our development, we will see this order of development impacted, and that can compound over our developmental years. So it's really important to provide therapeutic intervention as early as possible to support the reparation of brain development, but equally it's really important to understand how the brain has been impacted developmentally and to provide sequenced and targeted therapeutic interventions. Part of this means that we know the brain develops through repetition. The more experiences we have of something, the stronger our body and brain adaptations to that experience will be. And so we need repeated exposures to learn something and to develop those pathways, but equally we need repeated exposures to something that's healing if we are to heal from trauma. Part of this is having exposure to beautiful, safe relationships. Now, in our relationships, we have lots of repeated exposure. We are modeled things. We develop our self-view and worldview through our key relationships. If these relationships have not been safe and have perhaps been harmful, then we may have experienced harm through those relationships. If that's the case, we can't heal those areas of harm outside of relationship. Relationships are key to healing. Trauma is overwhelming and threatening. We know that it overwhelms our sense of being able to cope and survive the experience. And equally, we know that Dr. Gabor Mate says that trauma is what happens in us, not to us. And so we don't look at the external experience in as much as trying to determine whether or not someone has experienced that experience as a traumatic experience or as trauma. We look at the internal perception and the impact of that experience on the overall systems, the neurophysiology, the neurobiology of the brain, and the child's ways of being and relating to the world. Trauma is a violation of safety and trust, and it's a violation of the way that we are designed neurobiologically to experience relationships. And because of this, it disrupts our worldview, our self-view, our experience of safety in the world, and also our neurobiology and neurophysiology. And because of all those things, we need safety, calm, and regulation to be able to heal, to be able to find balance and to settle back into safety so that we can connect to the world and to learn from the world. We may see behaviors from the lens of trauma as a story. So we move from a behavioral model into a trauma responsive model where behavior becomes communication. The behavior is a child's attempt to communicate their story. If we can understand the story, we can start to offer ways of supporting, co-regulating, and healing the child. And so with all of these principles in mind, I invite you to hold them in mind. They form the framework of practice. They underpin all of the learning that you've been doing with us. And they're really important in terms of guiding you in your practice. So hold them in mind as we move forward into today's learning, because as I said, they are very crucial forms of the overall practice framework. So coming into just a quick reminder of the window of tolerance work that you did do in session 1 on the window of tolerance, and looking at what it looks like again. So we know that Ogden, Minton and Payne developed this model, and it has been broadly used in schools around Australia. We are developing language that is becoming a common shared language in schools that allows for this psychoeducation and communication of states of regulation between children and parents, between teachers and parents, and between teachers and children. So it's really exciting work. We need to, as we move into this space, be really mindful of the language that we use around window of tolerance, keeping in mind that movement in and out of the window isn't conscious. And if we do see movement in or out of the window, it means the child's moved out of safety and needs support to move back into safety. Once the child is in safety, the nervous system will come back to baseline. The nervous system will be perceiving safety and will allow the child to move into those ways of being we want them to be in a school or class environment or early education environment. So this means that as we explore the window of tolerance, we don't want it to be a further shaming message for the child. We want it to normalize our states of arousal, that we all move in and out of our window, and that it's really normal and appropriate for the nervous system to move out of the window if it's perceiving threat. So the strongest message is if the child is outside the window, we need support to move back into safety as a strong, grounded, regulated, safe and calm adult presence. We can support that movement back into safety through stepping into the role of the external regulator, as we spoke about in session 1. So we know that we have this beautiful regulated window of tolerance where we're wanting children and ourselves as childcare workers or early child learning workers We all want to be inside the window. Particularly for us, it's very important to know when we're moving towards the boundaries of our window and to have strategies to support our own movement back into the window, because we are the strongest tool the child will have access to support their own balance. So the green line indicates what we're looking for in terms of that regulated, beautiful ebb and flow of activation inside the window. So I'm going to get you to pause this video in a second and just make a couple of little practice reflections. You don't have to spend too long on it, but I think it's really important to invite you to really start to link this to practice. I'm going to ask you a couple of reflection questions. So how might you, once you've learned this information, explain the window of tolerance to a child in your care, or to perhaps a child's family or caregivers that you're working with, so that you're able to develop a beautiful common language that supports a child to understand that regulation of arousal is a really normalized experience, but also then to have a beautiful language that we can work with to support that movement back into safety. Second practice reflection is, when a child is outside their window, do you know at the moment which direction to support them to move? So if they are hyper-aroused or if they are hypo-aroused, what strategies do you think you could use to help them find balance again? So I'll get you to pause and have a think, maybe make some notes, and when you're ready, come back. So again, just to remind you that we did look at the theory side of things on working with protective responses. And we looked at that from the lens of not only window of tolerance, but also polyvagal theory, because the two theories work really well together. Looking at if we're wanting to move a child from mobilization into social engagement, or from immobilization to social engagement, or to support social engagement. So there are different strategies that you will use for each way of being. And that's important to remember, because we want to know which strategies to use for which way of being. And this again will support, as I asked you earlier in your practice reflection, how to know what to use to support that directional movement. So that means moving down back into the window or up into the window. Now, to kind of give you some very practical strategies that you can start to practice immediately, the most useful thing that we can do in this hour is really look more closely at using embodied ways of being to access the nervous system to support that movement of the nervous system into the window of tolerance. Now, we can do that through all of our senses. So it's a really beautiful way to work. The child has access to their senses 24 hours a day. It's free and it's not complicated. You don't need any other tools, and it's a beautiful way to start to empower the child to build their own toolkit and their own knowledge around what their nervous system responds to both speed up if they need to move out of immobilization into the window, or to calm down, to move from mobilization into the window. So we can use vision, we can use sound, we can use smell, taste, touch, we can use movement, in particular the movement of our head in space. We can use movement in our body to provide feedback to our nervous system, and we can also develop interoceptive skills, which is just awareness of basic primary functions, to really support this connection between body and nervous system, which then communicates from the nervous system to the brain messages of safety that support the child's movement back into the window. So some beautiful examples of this, as we started to explore in session 1, are things such as accessing the breath. The breath is one of the most beautiful foundational tools that we can use that does message to our nervous system messages of safety and calm. The more that we learn to use the breath, the more the child can start to connect the breath to safety. And as we have that increased felt sense of safety through the breath, we can see that response from the body, from the brain, from the nervous system, of the movement back into the window of tolerance. Now, you might already be using the breath in your class. And if you recall back to session 1, we did look at ways that schools have embedded breathing strategies into a rhythmic day to provide multiple repeated, titrated experiences of safety through the breath. So there are many different tools that you can access. We can use vision combined with the breath to start to explore different combined strategies, such as the examples you can see before you on the screen, like smelling the flower, blowing the pinwheel. There are also some beautiful multimedia resources available, both through apps and also you can find on YouTube, that encourage different ways of learning how to breathe. So I invite you to explore different resources that are available to you and see what you may want to use in your classroom. We can use sound, and these are really beautiful examples of building your sensory toolkit. This is an example of, and I don't know if you've seen it before, of the way sound can really communicate messages of safety to the child through stimulation of the senses. I'm going to show you this. Watch with me and see what you think.
Her life and the inequality.
So that is a lovely example of the way that sound can work to stimulate the senses, to allow the child's nervous system to perceive a particular sense and to then respond in safety. Now, the video that I was going to play there has not turned up for us, but I'm going to talk to the olfactory sense. So the olfactory sense is our sense of smell. It is a sense of smell that is the strongest sense we know linked to memory. So you might notice for yourself, you can think of your favorite smell, and you'd be surprised at people's favorite smells. I've taught around the country, probably thousands of people now, and I do ask this question quite a lot because it's a wonderfully connecting question to start to share our memories and our favorite senses of smell. And I have to say, so I have been surprised by some people's favorite smells. I want you to think about your favorite smell. What is your favorite smell? And then I want you to think about why. Why is that your favorite smell? And as we canvass different people's memories that are attached to the favorite smell, often themes come up from those memories. And I can talk about themes now because of the number of people I've asked this question to around the country. The themes that come up from favorite smell are normally themes of connection, comfort, and joy. And so we have this beautiful emotive quality to the sense of smell. As I said, it can be the strongest sense linked to memory. And so it has this beautiful quality of being able to really strongly embed experiences into our memory, into our way of being, and connecting us to people through distance, not only spatial distance, but also distance through time. So you might notice that when you recall your favorite smell, you can go all the way back in time. So it has this quality of time travel around it. We need to be mindful that this can work both for very beautiful memories, but also for traumatic memories. And so safely exploring the sense of smell with our children can be a beautiful way of creating strong mind-body connection that then allows us to collect children from experiences of not being safe, of losing their felt sense of safety, and bring them back into their window of tolerance. Equally, we can use the body. So remember I said the vestibular and proprioception senses. So we can use movement to really start to explore feelings of safety. That might sound funny, but you might recall yourself that, have you ever heard of the power position? So if you're wanting to feel really strong for a day, you can stand in the Wonder Woman pose or the superhero pose. You can stand nice, strong and tall, and they recommend you stand like that for about a minute. And that can actually increase your perceived perception of empowerment for the day. So we know that different postures in the body can have different impact on the nervous system. You might notice that children respond to particular environments or changes in routine or transitions in different ways. And that can indicate what's happening for them neurophysiologically. So reconnecting the child back into the body will reconnect them to all of these different senses that allow for that stronger mind-body connection. And that again can help to support their movement back into safety, back into the window. So you can explore with children all of these different playful shapes and movements through the body. And that can encourage that body awareness, which we know then allows them to access at least 2 to 3 different senses. And through that sensory activation or that increased sensory awareness, we can have movement back into the window. And again, this is a really beautiful tool to use because we can use movement all the way through the day. We can use it to create rhythmic days. We can embed movement into transition to support safety when there is a threat to safety through change in the day. We know that transition is often a challenging time. And so starting to look at how we might use body movement to increase body awareness, to help support movement into the window of tolerance at maybe more, I'll call them vulnerable times in the day, times where you know children may be disrupted, where they may lose their felt sense of safety for a moment through that loss of predictability, through change, or through transition. So I encourage you to perhaps do this with yourself. Press pause again. And I want you to explore how it feels like to make these different shapes, to move from being very, very small to very, very large, what it feels like to take up more space and less space, pushing and pulling, how you might move if you were feeling really light, or how you might move if you're feeling really strong. I think you can play all the way from basic body movements like big and small, light and strong, to emotions. So stomping out things like a dinosaur, big stomping dinosaur, or creeping like a little pussycat. And starting to playfully explore movement in a way that you are using it as play, but underneath that, you know that you're using it to support movement back into the window. So I'm going to get you to pause again, and these are your practice reflections. Now that you have some knowledge of the window of tolerance, you have an understanding of what regulated arousal looks like. We've also covered what dysregulated arousal looks like. We covered off in great detail in session 1 how you might spot fight or flight or freeze or submission. I'd add fawning in there as well. What kind of behaviours do you see for each different way of being? And then relate that to what does that look like for a child living in the window of tolerance or moving outside of the window of tolerance. Trying to hold the child in mind for a moment and start to explore that lived experience of the child. And then hold in mind, how can we support them to widen their window of tolerance? How can we support them with our coping resources? What might you already be doing? So as we explore these strategies, maybe you're already using a lot of them and it's just really nice to put a name to it and maybe you're getting some ideas. And once you've finished your reflection, you can come back and I'll still be here. We're going to finish up the last 15 minutes of today's session, but we're going to hold the child in mind as we do that. So I'm going to explore using safety as a strategy because I think it's really important and I know safety underpins everything. Safety aligns with the neurosequential principles of development. We know that we have a function of neuroception of safety in the brainstem, which I'll talk about in a minute. And that helps us to perceive a felt sense of safety in all different domains of safety. So it's really important to know that there are different domains of safety. We can provide environmental or physical safety to the child, but still not be providing relational safety. So we're wanting to really provide very specific intentional cues of safety from all of these domains to the child so that we can increase their felt sense of safety. Once we've increased their felt sense of safety, we know that then they're able to move into their window of tolerance. And so considering the sensory environment, knowing how your child responds to different stimuli, and you may not know yet. So one of the first tools that we can develop is exploring with the child how they respond to the sensory environment, what makes them feel safer and what makes them feel less safe. And equally, we do that in our physiological domain as well. So how can we support movement into the window through predictability, routine, and consistency? And then we want to consider our relational safety. So how do we engage with the child? How do we use our own grounded, authentic presence to support the child's movement into safety? How do we help them to regulate? How are we using our eye contact, our facial expressions, our proximity, our body language, and our prosody of voice to help us connect to the child? This is underpinned by, as I said, the neuroception of safety, which actually happens in the brainstem. It is our knowing without knowing. We look for things that are familiar. We are also trying to determine what is safe and unsafe, and this all happens below our level of awareness. It's something that happens all the time. We're always scanning our environment in terms of this neuroceptive function of our brainstem, just making sure that we are in a felt sense of safety. So it is a survival mechanism that keeps us alive because we must be able to detect danger very quickly in our environments. But knowing this is good for us because we can then really start to build those neuroceptive cues of safety into our practice. So a huge part of the neuroception of safety is predictability. We can remove a threat and not increase a felt sense of safety. So what we're wanting to do is really explore the way that we are building predictability into our environment. This also links back into polyvagal theory, knowing that we will respond to change as if that change is a threat. So we can be in social engagement, we can be having a beautiful day, we can be connecting with our friends, and then we have something that we weren't predicting happen in our routine, and that will push us into mobilization. And so knowing our Neuroception of safety, knowing how our body and our neurophysiology responds to a loss of felt safety through a lack of predictability in our environments. The question then for our practice is, how do we create felt safety? And so these are some suggestions that we have. We can use our own grounded presence, as I said, but also explore your day in the early childhood setting and just look for ways that you can increase your predictability. Look for the consistency in the day. Increase the access a child has to familiar things. Routine is essential in terms of creating that felt safety. At all points in the day, safety is the foundation. So if you're ever at a loss as to what to do or how to respond to a child in need, come back to safety. It's always a priority. And odds are, if we're seeing behaviors that indicate the child has lost a felt sense of safety, increasing the felt sense of safety is going to directly support that child to move back into their window. So some examples of that are, try using your proximity and posture to deconstruct the power in the relationship. So get down on the child's level. Use your prosody of voice. Increase the cues of safety that are coming from your power language, your minor facial gestures. So looking at the way that you can really communicate through your face and through the storyteller voice that you are safe and that the child is safe without having to say it. See if you can calm the environment down. Once a child is in threat, we know that the brain is going to have increased difficulty processing sensory information. Reduce as much sensory information as possible, and that will unburden the child's brain to come back into safety. We know that when a child is in threat, their language centers shut down. So visual cues and diagrams and reminders are really wonderful tools. And again, explore your timetable, explore the routine in the day. Look for any unnecessary transitions. See how you can change the way that we transition in the classroom to make it connected, to provide a safe person, a safe place, and a safe activity for the child to support that transition, knowing that supported transition reduces the threat, increases predictability, and therefore increases safety. So again, this is a really wonderful opportunity for us to start to create some really practical ways of looking at what we do at the moment and incorporating anything that you like from these sessions into your practice. So again, I'm going to ask you to press pause. I want you to think about how you can use these ideas to promote safety in the classroom. So what do you do to promote safety if a child is in flight? And what do you do to promote safety if a child is shut down? Now, these, again, practice questions are designed to integrate both session 1 and 2 and really start to require you to make those practice connections for yourself. So using the knowledge that's been shared across the 2 sessions, knowing how you respond differently to different states of arousal, but then also maybe thinking about it from a collective point of view, from the point of view of transitions and supporting that predictability and that felt sense of safety in the room. So coming up with some strategies, maybe for the whole group. What do you do if you notice that the whole group is kind of maybe too energized for that learning space and you're wanting to maybe contain that play energy and bring it back into a more balanced window of tolerance? And equally, what if the room feels like the whole room is really low energy and needs support to wake up? What might you use in terms of a group activity that can support the whole room to wake up? And so starting to think about the nervous system as either needing support to calm down and come into balance or needing support to wake up and come into balance. And we're going to support that movement into safety with our own grounded presence. So again, it's a big ask, I think, of educators. It's a big ask of anyone in this trauma responsive practice space. Again, always coming back to, we are the key. We are the key mechanism to healing. The way that we model being regulated and finding safety really supports children to experience what that feels like for themselves. And so again, we need to be able to regulate ourselves, to ground ourselves first, take that deep breath or a few deep breaths, and then communicate signs of safety through our tone or prosody of voice, face and body movements, our attitudes of unconditional positive regard, understanding the child's needs, but also communicating and giving the child language for what they're experiencing and staying in relationship with them, staying connected, modeling that therapeutic model of relationship where we are able to model repair after rupture. And so the last part of today's practice is to really look at the centre's environment, exploring all of these different elements of safety and things that are able to support movement back into the window of tolerance. And then also exploring what parts of the environment might be challenging for babies and children who've experienced trauma. And again, I encourage you to press pause and really have a good think about this and maybe even come back to this. Go and have a look at the environment, explore the things that you think actually might reduce a felt sense of safety or increase a felt sense of safety. Look at the activities that you use, look at the way that we're using our staff, and look at the way we're using relationship in the centre. Again, really exploring that idea of safe transition, because we know that in particular, not only do all people experience change and transition as a threat in the brain, we know that children who've experienced trauma will perceive it even more so as a threat. And so once there's a transition, we will lose our felt sense of safety and we may see behaviours that indicate there's been a reversion back to survival mode. And this can look like protective or defensive responses. And finally, I wanted to talk about a concept that links into polyvagal theory, but also allows us to support the window of tolerance of the room. So this is looking at ways that we can use play as neural exercise. And I think this is really important for the early learning settings. We are wanting to explore the concept of polyvagal theory by Dr. Stephen Porges and his further work, on using play to actually support the child's neurophysiological responses to heal. So we can actually also use play to support a whole room to move into social engagement, which is where we know they're inside their window of tolerance. We can use play, but it has to be particular play. So the kind of play that has risk has to be a little bit of risk because we want the child to actually move into a state of mobilization. So we want the child's neurophysiology to mobilize in response to the risk in the play. We want it to be relational. So we want the play to be relational, so it can't be play alongside. It can't be like an interactive multimedia. It has to be relational play, where there is the opportunity for rupture and repair. So there are your three components that play as a strategy must have. Now, what this does is it allows the child to move between different states. Now, this movement between states can be impacted upon through experiences of trauma. So children who've experienced trauma may not actually have had much practice at moving between states. And so they're a bit stuck in their nervous systems. So this can actually support them to start healing their nervous system and move back into their window of tolerance. It's a broadening strategy. So it allows us to gradually, through play, support a child to broaden their window through repairing their nervous system. Now, I want you to think about peekaboo as a perfect example. When the mum or the carer disappears, baby has no sense of object permanency and moves into mobilization. So there's the risk component. Then when mum reappears, the baby is mobilized again because it's not predicted. But then what happens is mum uses synchrony of voice, facial expressions, mutual gaze, that beautiful attunement and joyful mutual delight in play to repair the relationship. And what that does is move the child back into social engagement. So this is a beautiful way that in a beautiful, secure relationship, children have practice from infancy of moving between states. Children who haven't had that experience can actually experience it with you in the centre in beautifully safe, supported, playful ways. And what that does is not only become a strategy that we can use as carers and early childhood educators to repair and broaden windows, but it also allows us to move a whole group into a space of social engagement, or move a whole group into the window of tolerance through particular kinds of play. So I encourage you to think about play that might look and feel like peekaboo. Any game that has an element of risk. Think about what the risk might be. It might be getting caught. It might be getting found. There has to be play that's relational, and it has to model that little bit of rupture and repair. So in peekaboo, the rupture was mum going away. The repair was mum coming back. So finding games that look and feel like that you can use for the whole class, the whole group, can be beautiful tools that you can use as strategies to move whole groups back into their window. So in summary, we want to be predictable. We want to stay connected. As external regulators, we need to be present and grounded. We want to promote understanding, and I believe not just understanding, but normalization. We all move inside and outside of our windows. We don't want to normalize just what we consider the good, calm part of the window, because again, that further shames children who are struggling to find balance because of their experiences of trauma. We want to find ways in our settings where we can equip the children we work with calming and engaging strategies that they can access and that will help to co-regulate them. I really hope you have enjoyed today. Our final reflection is for you to think about what this means for your teaching and your site. We want you to stay connected with us. We hope you've had a great time. We hope you've made some really lovely reflection on your practice and the ways that this might look like and feel like for your future practice. Thank you for your time today. I'll see you next time. Bye for now.